Well, good morning. About time to begin our Bible class hour this morning. Good to see everybody here. We're going to continue our study of what we're calling the Israelite Example. So, my brother has been going through a study of the book of Jeremiah for several weeks, and he's got several more weeks left. So, I gave him a few weeks break. So, after this morning, we'll finish our study here of the Israelite Example and sort of what examples and lessons can we learn from the Israelites. I felt like that was appropriate in the context of our study of Jeremiah, since we've studied a lot about the sins that the nation of Israel did and then the punishment that God brought upon them with the captivities there for their sins. So we examined a little bit of the examples that we can learn from them. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul tells us that these things were written for examples for us. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 6, it says, "Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted." And then verse number 11, "Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." So sometimes maybe we look back at the Israelites and think, well, I wouldn't have done that if I was, if I had lived back then. I wouldn't have done the things that they had done. But, maybe we wouldn't have, maybe we don't struggle with the sin of idolatry today like they did. But there are things that can become idols to us today. So I think it's a good lesson for us to look at the things that they did and make application to us today. So we looked at the Christian walk based on the Israelites' time in Egypt, their slavery, and then the Exodus and their entrance into the Promised Land, how that was an example of our Christian life today. We also looked at how the conquering of Canaan, the conquering of the land of Canaan when they entered into the land, was another example of our Christian lives today in the church. This morning we're going to look at Nadab and Abihu. So I think we can learn a lot from them. We see their death here in Leviticus chapter 10. Let's all turn over to Leviticus chapter 10. So I think probably most of us are probably familiar with this story. But I'd like for us to look at it in a little bit of detail this morning about what Nadab and Abihu did and why were they punished. Why were they put to death for what they had done. Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 and 2 says, "And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord." So we see, I guess at first glance, there's not a tremendous amount of detail as far as, at least in my mind, there's not a tremendous amount of detail about what went wrong or what they did wrong or what they did that wasn't right per se. We can see that they offered strange fire, but what exactly does that mean? I mean, simply we can look and see that they did something that God had commanded them not to do. So they had disobeyed God. We can see that pretty clearly. But at least in my mind, it makes me think, well, what exactly did they do that was wrong, that deserved their death? So I think we can look at that, examine that this morning, and then we can gain a lot, application for us as New Testament Christians in regards to Nadab and Abihu. So to give a little bit of background here, what's happening in around Leviticus chapter 10. Obviously, we don't have time to look at chapters 1 through 7 in detail, but if you go back and look at chapters 1 through 7, you'll see that all the laws and the regulations of the sacrifices God has laid out. He's laid them out to Moses, and he's telling Moses, these are the sacrifices that you need to offer. You can see them on the screen here: the burnt offering, the meat offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering, and the peace offering. So God lays out the who, what, when, where, and how of all of these sacrifices. So he gives Moses the reasons why you would offer each sacrifice, what each sacrifice entails, what animal should you be offering, when should it be offered and where should it be offered, and all the details of all of these sacrifices. He gives them to Moses, and then Moses gives them to Aaron and his sons. So that's there's a lot of details involved with that. Like I said, we don't have enough time to look at the details of that, but we are going to read chapter 8 in its entirety, because if we read in chapter 8, you will see a lot of the details that are listed in chapters 1 through 7 are shown in the application here in chapter 8 when they're actually doing the consecration. So God lays out the laws according to the sacrifices He gives them to Moses, and then in chapter 8, we have the anointing and the consecration of the priest. There's some sacrifices offered there, and you'll see all the details, most of the details that are there are in chapters 1 through 7, where God has given them to Moses, so we can see them following the law there. So starting in Leviticus chapter 8, let's start in verse number 1. We'll read this whole chapter. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take Aaron and his sons with him, and the garments, and the anointing oil, and a bullock for the sin offering, and 2 rams, and a basket of unleavened bread, and gather thou all the congregation together unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him, and the assembly was gathered together unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Moses said unto the congregation, This is the thing which the Lord commanded to be done. And Moses brought Aaron and his sons, and washed them with water, and he put upon him the coat, and girded him with the girdle, and clothed him with the robe, and put the ephod upon him, and he girded him with the curious girdle of the ephod, and bound it unto him therewith. And he put the breastplate upon him. Also he put in the breastplate the Urim and the Thummim. And he put the mitre upon his head. Also upon the mitre, even upon his forefront, did he put the golden plate, the holy crown, as the Lord commanded Moses. And Moses took the anointing oil, and anointed the tabernacle and all that was therein, and sanctified them. And he sprinkled thereof upon the altar 7 times, and anointed the altar and all his vessels, both the laver and his foot, to sanctify them. And he poured of the anointing oil upon Aaron's head, and anointed him to sanctify him. And Moses brought Aaron's sons, and put coats upon them, and girded them with girdles, and put bonnets upon them, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he brought the bullock for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the bullock for the sin offering. And he slew it, and Moses took the blood, and put it upon the horns of the altar, round about with his finger, and purified the altar, and poured the blood at the bottom of the altar, and sanctified it to make reconciliation upon it. And he took all the fat that was upon the inwards, and the caul above the liver, and the 2 kidneys, and their fat, and Moses burned it upon the altar. But the bullock and his hide, his flesh, and his dung he burned with fire without the camp, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he brought the ram for the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the ram, and he killed it. And Moses sprinkled the blood upon the altar round about, and he cut the ram into pieces, and Moses burnt the head and the pieces and the fat. And he washed the inwards and the legs in water, and Moses burnt the whole ram upon the altar. It was a burnt sacrifice for a sweet savor, and an offering made by fire unto the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he brought the other ram, the ram of consecration, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the ram, and he slew it. And Moses took the blood of it, and put it upon the tip of Aaron's right ear, and upon the thumb of his right hand, and upon the great toe of his right foot. And he brought Aaron's sons, and Moses put of the blood upon the tip of their right ear, and upon the thumbs of their right hands, and upon the great toes of their right feet. And Moses sprinkled the blood upon the altar round about. And he took the fat and the rump, and all the fat that was upon the inwards, and the caul above the liver, and the 2 kidneys and their fat, and the right shoulder. And out of the basket of unleavened bread that was before the Lord, he took 1 unleavened cake, and a cake of oiled bread, and 1 wafer, and put them on the fat and upon the right shoulder. And he put all upon Aaron's hands and upon his sons' hands, and waved them for a wave offering before the Lord. And Moses took them from their hands, and burnt them on the altar upon the burnt offering. They were consecrations for a sweet savor. It is an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And Moses took the breast, and waved it for a wave offering before the Lord. For of the ram of consecration it was Moses' part, as the Lord commanded Moses. And Moses took of the anointing oil, and of the blood which was upon the altar, and sprinkled it upon Aaron, and upon his garment, and upon his sons, and upon his son's garments with him, and sanctified Aaron and his garments, and his sons' garments with him. And Moses said unto Aaron and to his sons, Boil the flesh at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and there eat it with the bread that is in the basket of consecrations, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And that which remaineth of the flesh and of the bread shall ye burn with fire. Ye shall not go out of the door of the tabernacle of the congregation in 7 days, until the days of your consecration be at an end. For 7 days shall he consecrate you. And as he hath done this day, so the Lord hath commanded to do, to make an atonement for you. Therefore shall ye abide at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation day and night 7 days, and keep the charge of the Lord, that ye die not, for so I commanded. So Aaron and his sons did all the things which the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. So, I know that was a long, lengthy reading. There was a lot of details, a lot of specific details around the sacrifices, but I think it's worth reading because we can bring several things out of this chapter 8 here. Number one, the most important thing to me is if you look in verse number 36, so Aaron and his sons did all the things which the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. So you saw a lot of sacrifices. There was a lot of animals that were to be killed, to be offered. If we go back, if you scan through, you'll see that Aaron and his sons put their hands upon the animals as they were killed. They had certain garments they put on. Moses consecrated them with sprinkling of oil or blood. Moses sanctified the altar by sprinkling the blood around it and putting it on the horns. He put the blood on their ear, their thumb, and their big toe. So there was a lot of details involved in the consecration of the priests here in chapter 8. And God had given these details to Moses. Moses had given them now to Aaron and his sons, and they all followed them exactly how they were supposed to be followed, because verse 36 tells us that they did all things which the Lord commanded them to do. So they go through this period of consecration where God has consecrated and anointed them as priests, and now they're supposed to remain at the tabernacle for 7 days. This is the period of consecration, so they're at the door of the tabernacle for 7 days. So then we go into verse number 9. We're not going to read all of verse number 9. We'll read a little bit. We're going to read verses 1 through 7. Basically what we're seeing in chapter 9 is the offerings of Aaron. So we saw Moses offered some sacrifices here in chapter 8, consecrated the priests. The things that Aaron does in chapter 9 are very similar to the sacrifices and the things that Moses had done in chapter 8. But we'll read a little bit of chapter 9 just to hit the high points here. So starting verse number 1, And it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said unto Aaron, Take thee a young calf for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And unto the children of Israel thou shalt speak, saying, Take ye a kid of the goats for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both of the first year, without blemish, for a burnt offering. Also a bullock and a ram for peace offerings, to sacrifice before the Lord, and a meat offering mingled with oil. For today the Lord will appear unto you. And they brought that which Moses commanded before the tabernacle of the congregation, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, This is the thing which the Lord commanded that ye should do, and the glory of the Lord shall appear unto you. And Moses said unto Aaron, Go unto the altar, and offer thy sin offering and thy burnt offering, and make an atonement for thyself and for the people, and offer the offering of the people, and make an atonement for them, as the Lord commanded. So all the congregation, we're told, all the congregation of Israel gathers to the tabernacle, or I guess as close as all the congregation can get to the tabernacle, the door of the tabernacle. And Moses tells Aaron, offer these sacrifices to atone for yourself and for the people, and God is going to show His glory unto you today. So this is an important moment we can see in the nation of Israel, because God has instituted the Levitical sacrifices here. He's instituted the way that all these offerings should be made, and He's going to show His acceptance of these sacrifices by the glory that He will, by showing His glory to the people, that we'll see in a minute here. But this is basically what Moses is telling Aaron is, do these sacrifices, and God is going to show His glory before the people. So if you look at verses 8 through 21 is very similar to the process that Moses went through. This will be 8 days earlier, right? So if you look in verse number 1 in chapter 9, and it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. So the priests had been consecrated for 7 days. So after that 7 days, now it's Aaron's turn to offer sacrifices for himself and for the people. And in verse 8 through 21, his sacrifices go much like Moses did. And then we see in verse number 22, and Aaron lifted up his hand toward the people and blessed them, and came down from offering of the sin offering and the burnt offering and peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And there came a fire from the Lord and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. So we'll see in verse number 5, going back to verse number 5, they brought that which Moses commanded before the tabernacle of the congregation, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. So all the congregation is near to the tabernacle. They're standing. Aaron offers his sacrifices. God sends fire from heaven and consumes the sacrifice on the altar, which would no doubt show his acceptance of the sacrifice here. And then all the people bow down in reverence to God here, that He showed His glory to the people. So a few points that I like to make here from this context. I know we covered a lot of ground here pretty quick, but there's a few points that I like to make is how many times Aaron and his sons are mentioned. So we have Nadab and Abihu mentioned. Anytime it says Aaron and his sons, they're part of that group, right? So we know that they die. So we just went through chapter 9, verse 24, the end of the chapter. Then in chapter 10, verse 1 and 2, we have the death of Nadab and Abihu. So you've got this whole time of sacrifices, and the glory of God comes, and all this, and then Nadab and Abihu die, right in the middle of this, basically. So something that I like to point out is how many times they're mentioned in the first several chapters of Leviticus. In chapter 6, verse 9, and he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, a ram without blemish out of the flock. This is going to be the wrong verse. He shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, a ram without blemish out of the flock, with thy estimation for a trespass offering unto the priest. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I read the wrong verse. Yeah, chapter 6, verse 9. Command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar all night unto the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be burning. So you got verse 8, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons. So you've got Aaron and his sons mentioned here. They're being commanded for the burnt offering. Verse number 14, this is the law of the meat offering. The sons of Aaron shall offer it before the Lord, before the altar. Verse number 24, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and to his sons, saying, this is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is killed, shall the sin offering be killed before the Lord. It is most holy. Verse 25. Oh, I'm sorry, there was verse 25. Chapter 8, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take Aaron and his sons with him, and the garments, and the anointing oil, and a bullock for the sin offering, and 2 rams, and a basket of unleavened bread. Verse number 6, Moses brought Aaron and his sons and washed them with water. Verse number 13, and Moses brought Aaron's sons and put coats upon them, and girded them with girdles, and put bonnets upon them, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he brought the bullock for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the bullock for the sin offering. Verse number 18, and he brought the ram for the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the ram. Verse number 22, and he brought the other ram, the ram of consecration, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the ram. Verse number 24, and he brought Aaron's sons, and Moses put of the blood upon the tip of their right ear, and upon the thumbs of their right hands, and upon the great toes of their right feet. And Moses sprinkled the blood upon the altar round about. Verse number 27, and he put all of Aaron's hands, and he put all upon Aaron's hands and upon his son's hands, and waved for them a wave offering before the Lord. Verse number 30. And Moses took of the anointing oil and of the blood which was upon the altar, and sprinkled it upon Aaron, and upon his garments, and upon his sons, and upon his sons' garments with him, and sanctified Aaron and his garments, and his sons garments with him. Verse number 31. And Moses said unto Aaron and to his sons, boil the flesh at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and there eat it with the bread that is in the basket of consecrations, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And in verse number 36, we see again, so Aaron and his sons did all the things which the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. So I think that's important that we see how much Aaron's sons were involved with the whole consecration, the whole institution of the Levitical priesthood. They were very important. You see, every time that God says, tell unto Moses, or tell unto Aaron and his sons, they were there when Moses offered the sacrifice. They put their hands upon the sacrificial animal there. So they did all these things. They did all these things in accordance with God's will, because He tells us so in verse number 36. So that's something that I think is important here in this context. Also, we can see, again, that they obeyed every command. There was a lot of commands given, a lot of very specific commands as far as the sacrifices. You see all the things that they had to do, the different animals, all the different, the offerings, the burnt offering, the meat offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering, and the peace offering. There were specific things that they had to do with each type of offering. They had the garments that they had to put on. So there was a lot of things that Nadab and Abihu did right, obviously. We see that from this context. There was a lot of things that they did that was totally in accordance with God's will. But once we get through chapter 9 into chapter 10, we see their death again. Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 1, Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which He commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. So if we see what happened, okay, all these sacrifices were offered, they were on the altar. God sent down fire from heaven and consumed the sacrifice that was on the altar, showing His acceptance of the sacrifice, right? All the people of Israel are bowed down at this time, and then we see Nadab and Abihu offer incense to God, and then they're killed because of it. So we know that it mentions that they offered strange fire, but we can see that apparently from the context here that the incense they offered was in accordance with God's will. If you look at Exodus chapter 30, verse number 34, we see God giving Moses some regulations around the incense that was to be burnt. Exodus chapter 30, verse 34, and the Lord said unto Moses, Take unto thee sweet spices, stacked, and onycha, and galbanum, these sweet spices with pure frankincense. Of each shall there be a light weight. Thou shalt make it a perfume, a confection, after the art of the apothecary, tempered together, pure and holy. And thou shalt beat some of it very small, and put of it before the testimony in the tabernacle of the congregation, where I will meet with thee. It shall be unto you most holy. And as for the perfume which thou shalt make, ye shall not make to yourselves according to the composition thereof. It shall be unto thee holy for the Lord. So we don't see any condemnation in the context of the incense. So it seems we can assume that the incense that they made, that they burnt, was in accordance with God's will. What we see that they were condemned for was the fire. So we see that they had offered strange fire before the Lord. We don't see where they get the fire from. I can't say that we can assume one way or the other where the fire had come from, but we do know it was strange fire. And as far as I can tell, there is no record of the incense being offered. That there's no record of God commanding incense to be offered during the sacrifices until you get to Leviticus chapter 16. So in Leviticus chapter 16, verse number 12, we see when God is giving Moses the regulations for the Day of Atonement. he tells in verse number 12, he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. So it could very well be that there was no command given by God for offering incense at this time. There was no command until it comes into the Day of Atonement. At least as far as the record that we see, we have no record of the Levitical law of God commanding incense to be burnt during the offering of the sacrifices. We see in Leviticus Chapter 16 in regards to the Day of Atonement. So, but in that instance, we can see that they were to get the fire from the burning altar. So the altar of sacrifice, they had, a burning fire there. They were to get the coals or get the fire from the altar there and start and burn the incense from that. Apparently, Nadab and Abihu did not do that. Instead, they got fire from somewhere else. I just think that's interesting because we can see, this is, obviously something that they did. At least to me, it appears they did it with good intentions. You've got the whole congregation here gathered before. They're bowing down in reverence to God as God consumed the sacrifice on the altar. And then we see immediately here that Nadab and Abihu offer this incense to God. So why would they offer incense to God unless it was for good intentions? Maybe they thought that, we've seen the glory of God here upon this altar. Let us offer this incense to commemorate this or to honor this. I don't know. We don't have their reasons for doing it, but it seems to me that they would at least have had some noble intentions. Why else would you be trying to burn incense to God without having noble intentions? But we see that they disobeyed God and that He had not commanded them to do this. So again, some points to notice here from Nadab and Abihu is that Moses had delivered very specific instructions on the offering of sacrifices from God, but was silent on the burning of incense. So we see that God gave him very specific instructions. We can see that in the first 7 or 8 chapters of Leviticus, as far as what was to be done with each sacrifice. It was very specific instructions, but there was no instruction given about burning incense any of this time. So Nadab and Abihu were outside of God's commands by burning incense because God had not commanded them to burn incense at this time. So we can see that God was silent upon this topic, at least until Leviticus chapter 16, where He mentions it in reference to the Day of Atonement. We also see that Nadab and Abihu were quote-unquote new priests, and they were just instituted and consecrated in this office 1 week prior. So it wasn't like they were, they had been doing this for years and years and years, and then just all of a sudden decided, well, I'm going to do this. I think this is better. They had just been instituted and consecrated as priests like 8 days earlier. So they were new at this. They had just received the command and had just started the institution of the sacrifices. I think it's interesting that they were apparently obedient in all other aspects. Again, in Leviticus chapter 8 and verse 36, so Aaron and his sons did all things which the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. So they were apparently obedient in every aspect except the burning of the incense. Again, they had noble intentions. At least I think it's a reasonable assumption for us to say that they had noble intentions because they were burning incense to God. Why else would you be burning incense to God unless it was for noble intentions? And the consequence of their disobedience was death. So we can see that clearly. So this is sort of, yeah.
The King James called it strange fire.
Yes.
And the ESV actually says unauthorized fire. It seems like the problem was with the fire.
Right.
I think Exodus 37 and 8, or 30 or 31, 7 and 8, says that the incense was being offered in the temple.
Right.
It just seems like the problem was with the fire.
Right.
And it could be that they were doing it at the wrong time. But I think 11 times in chapter 8, we saw the phrase commanded by God. As
Right.
God commanded
Yep.
Moses 11 times. And then in verse 1 of chapter 10, it says unauthorized fire. It seems like it was a fire that God didn't command them to use.
Yep.
You know, and it may be the incense, but it seems like back in Exodus, they were burning some incense. The priests were. So, I don't know. It just seems like that modifies fire rather than the incense being burned.
Yeah. Well, maybe I portrayed it wrong. That's what I was trying to say, Mike. Maybe I said it wrong, but yeah, it was they were condemned for the fire that they offered and not for the incense that they offered.
I'm not crazy about the ESV, but it does say unauthorized
Yeah. Right.
fire, and that
Yeah.
kind of brings to light.
Right.
It was a fire that God did
Yeah.
not authorize, not commanded
Right.
by God, so it was a strange fire.
Yeah.
God didn't recognize
Yeah. The issue was with the fire that they offered. It was a strange fire. Yes, sir.
everything that under the Levitical law, everything is very mechanical, very meticulous, specific instructions to do specific things, and they were told where to get the fire from. The fire had to come off the altar.
Right.
They offered fire that did not come off the altar.
Right.
It doesn't matter where they got it from.
Right. It didn't.
It doesn't matter. The fact is they got it from someplace besides where they were authorized.
Right. Exactly.
And because of that, they died. And it was set forth and it was done as an example to the people, the Israelites, saying, you will respect my authority, you will respect my law. God did that specifically. You know, if he's going to strike down his priest, what's he going to do to the people?
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, how many times do you see people today saying, well, God would never do that. You know, we're good people. Were Nadab and Abihu good people? Were they not doing it from what they thought was from their heart?
Yep.
They did it with right. You know, when we go back to Matthew 7:21 to 22, and we do it by the will of the Father, not by own will. And many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, has not done all these things in my name, and I will depart from you that work against me. Why? Because they didn't do it according to the will of the Father. And that's where so many people go wrong today, is it's not that they're worshiping by their own will rather than the will of the Father.
Right. Yeah, so on that point there in Leviticus Chapter 10, after their Nadab and Abihu are killed, verse number 6. Right, that's exactly what I was looking at. Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking at. Go ahead, Roger. Right. So God is telling them that this is my word, right, and my word needs to be followed. And this is my command. So I will be glorified to them that come nigh to me. So that's right. Yeah. So the issue here was the fire. I don't know if maybe I didn't, Mike. Maybe I misspoke, or maybe I didn't. Yeah. The issue. Yeah. Yeah. The issue was the fire. I guess what I was trying to point out was that there was no command as far as at least at this time, involving incense amongst the offerings. But you're right, yeah, the issue was with the fire. They offered strange fire before the Lord. So,
this is not the first time they did it by themselves.
Yes.
If Moses had been there or Aaron had
Yes.
been there, it may not have happened.
Yes, exactly.
But at some point, we are responsible for God's things.
Right.
We can't be babied all the way through.
Yep. Yeah, so back here it says Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle, then it says they came back out, but I wonder about that. Did that mean that, you know, how far away from Nadab and Abihu were Moses and Aaron? Maybe they were far enough away that they thought, well, we can do this. You know, they didn't ask for permission per se or something, right? So what lessons can we learn from Nadab and Abihu? I think that the biggest one we can learn is we must honor the silence of the Scriptures. And the first thing that comes to my mind from that standpoint is instrumental music. So our discussion has sort of been going in that way. You know, some people maybe would want to worship God in a way that's pleasing to them, maybe it comes from the same place. Maybe it's with good intentions, right? Maybe they think that it's God would not condemn me for this. You know, it helps my worship better, or helps me sing better, or whatever the case is. Maybe it is with completely good intentions. But the fact of the matter is that we have to honor the silence of the Scriptures. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 16, says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord." And then similar in Ephesians 5, verse 19, "Speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord." So we see the use of singing. If you look at the Greek word there that's used for make melody, it's the Greek word psallo. In this context, it implies that the heart is the instrument or the thing that is to be plucked. So the heart is what's being used to make melody. If you look at Thayer's definition for psallo, he says in the New Testament, it's to sing a hymn, to celebrate the praises of God in song. So, the context there of these verses and every verse in the New Testament in regards to music is always singing. There's no mention of musical instruments. So we would say that the New Testament is silent when it comes to musical instruments because they're not mentioned. We're not commanded to use musical instruments. So just like Nadab and Abihu did not honor the silence of the Scriptures or the silence of of God's command at their time, there's some people today that don't honor the silence of the Scriptures. And even if it's with good intentions, it's still disobedience to God. We can also learn from Nadab and Abihu that ignorance is not an excuse for disobedience, even if you have good intentions. So, even if your intention is to worship God better or to do what you think is better, ignorance is not an excuse. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, it says, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven." In order to do the will of God, we have to know the will of God. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15 tells us to study to show thyself approved. So, similar to Chris's comment there that maybe Moses and Aaron weren't right by, to stop Nadab and Abihu from offering this strange fire, or maybe they weren't there for them to ask the question, "Hey, can I offer this fire?" or whatever the case is. Nadab and Abihu were responsible for their own actions, and we as Christians today are responsible for our own actions. We're responsible for doing the will of God. In order for us to do the will of God, we have to know the will of God, so it's our own responsibility to study so that we can know the will of God and ensure that we're following it. Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, yeah. So yeah. Yeah, so maybe maybe they were inhibited a little bit and weren't thinking straight. That's a good point. That's not outside the realm of possibility. I think it's also we can learn that disobedience and even a single aspect is still sin. James chapter 2, verse 10 tells us, "For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all." So sin is sin, right? If you keep the whole law perfectly and you offend in one manner, it's still sin. It's still transgression of the law. We can see that apparently Nadab and Abihu obeyed in every other way except in offering strange fire to the Lord. So the same would hold for us as Christians today, that sin is sin. And I think we can learn that sin brings spiritual death to us today as Christians. In 1 John chapter 3, verse 4 says, "Whosoever committeth sin transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law." And then chapter 1, starting verse number, Yeah, that's not the right verse. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's James. Oh, that didn't sound right. James chapter 1, verse number 14. "But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." So the disobedience that Nadab and Abihu made in the Old Testament, they suffered physical death. Us in the New Testament as Christians, the death that we suffer is spiritual death, separation from God when we sin or transgress His law. So I think these are it's a good example for us today as Christians. With the story of Nadab and Abihu and their sin against God. I worked with the guy that I was talking with not too long ago about baptism, and he's a Calvinist, and he told me he's a self-proclaimed Calvinist, and we were talking about baptism, and he says, that he told me that he doesn't, on the one hand, he doesn't believe that baptism is essential, but he believes that you should be baptized, right? Baptism doesn't save you per se, but he believes that it's an act of obedience that you should do, once you're saved. And so, we got into the discussion of should you be baptized or not, and he said, well, I don't think that if you died on the way to the church to be baptized, that God is going to condemn you for that. I don't think that God is going to punish you for some technicality if you technically weren't baptized. But I think we can see clearly from Nadab and Abihu's example that there is no technicalities in God's law. You either obey God's law or you do not obey God's law. I mean, would you say that Nadab and Abihu died because of a technicality? I wouldn't say that. I would say that they died because they disobeyed God's law, and the same thing is true for us today. There is no technicality. It's not that God will not punish you because of some technicality. You either obey His law or you don't obey His law. And I think we can see that from not only this example, but also other examples throughout the Bible. How God means what He says, and we have to do what He says. There is no technicalities per se.
Moses gave him hands-on instructions.
He did, yeah. He showed him exactly.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Do this. Yeah. Put your hands on. Yeah, he did.
They didn't do it, not because they didn't know.
That's right, yeah. And that's, like you said, did you see how many times they're mentioned? Aaron and his sons. It's not like, they weren't there. They were there for the whole thing. Moses showed them exactly everything to do. Every time you see it mentioned, Aaron and his sons were there. So they saw exactly what they should be doing. Right. Right. Wasn't commanded to do. Yep. That's true. Yeah. Right. That's true. Right. Yep. I mean,
you were on a job, you were following rules, not get hurt, skip the rules. Even though you don't get hurt, you still skip the rules.
right, yeah.
You could have got.
Yeah.
You know? How many times do we take the same approach to life that some people take to the scriptures? You can teach them the fallacy of that, but for some reason you can't read
Yeah,
them.
you don't see
the
it.
fallacy of their approach to scripture.
Yeah. I think if I had a $10 million life insurance policy on myself before me and Christy got married, and I didn't change her as a beneficiary, or I was going to change the beneficiary to her as we got married, but when we got married, but let's say I died before we got married, would she be the beneficiary? No, because you didn't go through the process, right? It's pretty simple. You can understand that it does. Yeah. So that's a good point. Any other comments or questions? All right, thank y'all. I feel like Wallace is getting ready to ring the bell again.